The thing about hiring assassins to kill a human, as the galaxy would soon remember in excruciating detail, is that it requires a fundamental misunderstanding of evolutionary pressure. See, most sapient species in the known universe evolved on what the cartographers politely termed garden worlds. Planets where the most pressing daily concern was whether to photosynthesize before or after lunch. Then there was Earth. Earth, that rotating sphere of concentrated hostility, where everything from the bacteria to the weather actively conspired toward creative forms of extinction. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The Intersystem Scholastic Institute occupied a pristine station orbiting the diplomatic neutral zone of Sector 7, a monument to interspecies cooperation and higher learning that cost more than most planetary defense budgets. Its halls gleamed with that particular sterile shine that screamed. Funded by people who've never had to clean anything themselves. Here, the galaxy's brightest gathered to study everything from quantum mechanics to interpretive philosophy, all while pretending that 15 different species with 15 different biochemistries could share cafeteria space without incident. They couldn't, of course. Last month's noodle incident had required biohazard teams. The Institute prided itself on diversity. Attendance rosters included the crystalline Vethrik, who communicated through light refraction and found the concept of indoor voices baffling. There were Quellen, those squid-like philosophers who needed water-filled environment suits and spent most lectures arguing about whether chairs were objectively real. The Carthax brought their hive-mind collective consciousness and unsettling habit of referring to themselves in plural while occupying singular bodies. Even a few Torvin had enrolled, those massive silicon-based scholars who moved through corridors like ambulatory boulders with surprisingly good grades. And then there were the humans. 3 of them, to be precise. 3 representatives of a species that had clawed its way up from a planet that objectively hated them, where natural selection wasn't a theory, but a daily participation sport. The admissions board had accepted them as part of the Deathworld Integration Initiative, a program with a title that sounded progressive, but really meant, let's see if we can civilize these barbarians. 2 of the humans were male, both studying engineering, both having already caused 7 separate incidents involving wildly unsafe modifications to station equipment that, annoyingly, improved efficiency by 30%. They'd been issued warnings. They'd also been issued consulting contracts by the station maintenance department. The third was a girl named Kira Vex, and she was currently sitting in advanced xenobiology, taking notes on Quellen reproductive cycles with the kind of focus that would make you think this was normal, safe information that wouldn't feature in nightmares. She didn't look particularly dangerous. About 5.5 feet of lean muscle, dark hair pulled back in something the other students had learned was called a ponytail. Wearing the standard institute jumpsuit in blue. She had brown eyes that tracked movement with unsettling precision and an economy of motion that came from a life lived at 1.2 standard gravities. To the Vethrik, sitting 2 seats away, she registered as a predator that had learned to sit still. To the Quellen in the back, she was a fascinating case study in Deathworld adaptation. To the 5 assassins waiting outside in the hallway, she was about to become their last mistake. Now, let's talk about these assassins because they deserve some credit for sheer confidence, if nothing else. The Kesavar Guild didn't accept amateurs. Their training program had a 93% fatality rate, which honestly said terrible things about their HR department, but excellent things about survivor competency. These 5 represented 200 combined years of experience, 17 different weapon specializations, and exactly 0 completed risk assessments worth the datapad they weren't printed on. The leader, a Vethrik named Shard of Morning Light through Amber, let's call him Shard because nobody has time for crystalline nomenclature, had personally eliminated 14 high-value targets across 6 systems. His body refracted light in ways that made him nearly invisible, and his crystalline blades could vibrate at frequencies that sliced through most known materials like butter through slightly softer butter. His second was a Carthax collective called Unison, occupying 3 separate bodies positioned strategically down the hallway. Hive minds made excellent assassins because killing one body just annoyed them. You had to kill all 3 simultaneously, and good luck coordinating that. Then there was Vex. No relation to the target, unfortunate coincidence. A Torvin whose silicon-based biology made him effectively bulletproof and strong enough to crumple blast doors. He served as the team's heavy, the one who broke things when breaking things became necessary. The last 2 were Quellen twins, Depth and Pressure, who'd earned their reputation through creative use of paralytic toxins and an unsettling ability to squeeze through ventilation systems. In their water suits, they looked almost comical, like homicidal snow globes. Appearances, as the galaxy kept learning, were misleading. Their contract was simple: eliminate the human girl between classes. Payment: enough credits to fund early retirement on a garden world somewhere nice. The client: anonymous, but clearly someone with substantial resources and a grudge. The briefing materials had been comprehensive, including full biometrics, schedule, known associates, and a threat assessment that labeled her elevated risk, but manageable with proper preparation. That threat assessment had been compiled by analysts who'd never met a human. Target exits room 74 Alpha in approximately 2 minutes. Shard communicated through the team's neural link, his crystalline structure pulsing with light. Positions confirmed. Unison's 3 bodies clicked affirmation from their scattered locations. Vex rumbled something that might have been agreement or indigestion, hard to tell with silicon-based species. The Quellen twins bubbled acknowledgement from inside their suits. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Shard would initiate with a neural disruptor pulse. Humans had centralized nervous systems, ridiculously vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. While she convulsed, Depth and Pressure would inject her with enough paralytic to stop a Torvin's heart. If, somehow, she remained functional. Vex would provide blunt force trauma until biology surrendered to physics. Unison would handle anyone who tried to interfere, and they'd all be off station before security finished processing the incident report. "She's just a student," Depth transmitted, tentacles curling with anticipation inside his suit. "Barely into her 2nd year. This is almost unfair." "Console yourself with the credits," Shard replied, positioning himself to maximize surprise. "Though I admit I expected more challenge from a Deathworlder." Here's what the assassins knew about humans. They came from a high-gravity world with an oxygen-rich atmosphere, possessed remarkable endurance, and had an unfortunate tendency toward violence when stressed. Their files noted enhanced pattern recognition, persistence hunting instincts, and a disturbing ability to function through injuries that would incapacitate most species. Here's what the assassins didn't know. Humans were ambush predators with prey animal anxiety, a combination that evolution had refined into something approaching precognition for danger. Humans could detect threats through unconscious processing of environmental cues that their conscious minds hadn't even registered yet. They called it intuition, or gut feeling, or sometimes just, something feels wrong. Kira felt it the moment the lecture ended. Professor Kulvin was wrapping up his explanation of Quellen metamorphic stages when Kira's hindbrain started screaming. Nothing obvious, just that peculiar sensation of being watched, of spaces that felt wrong, of air pressure that had shifted in ways her consciousness couldn't articulate, but her instincts absolutely could. She gathered her datapads slowly, scanning the room without appearing to. Her classmates were filing out normally. Professor Kulvan was organizing his notes. Nothing seemed off, but every nerve ending she possessed was insisting otherwise. Humans, see, had survived everything from saber-toothed cats to ice ages to each other by listening when their instincts screamed. Kira's instincts weren't screaming. They were air raid sirens. She stood, adjusting her backpack, running through probabilities. Could be nothing. Could be paranoia from too much coffee and too little sleep. Could also be something very real. Because the Institute had received 3 credible threats against human students this semester alone, and dismissing survival instincts was how you became an evolutionary dead end. The classroom door slid open. Standard corridor beyond, sterile and bright. Students moving between classes. Everything normal except for the part where it absolutely wasn't. Kira stepped through the doorway and immediately cataloged everything wrong. A Vethrik positioned at an angle that provided no strategic value for normal movement, but excellent positioning for an ambush. 3 Carthax bodies spaced too perfectly for coincidence. A Torvan loitering near a support column for no apparent reason. 2 Quellan in environmental suits near a maintenance access that led nowhere students needed to go. Her conscious mind took maybe half a second to process this. Her body was already moving. Shard fired his neural disruptor exactly when planned. It hit empty air where Kira should have been, because Kira had already dropped into a roll that carried her past his firing line, while her hand came up holding something that made the assassin's targeting computers scream warnings. Humans called it pepper spray. The Institute's security called it contraband chemical deterrent. Kira called it insurance, because while the galaxy thought humans were paranoid, humans thought the galaxy was dangerously naive. The spray hit Shard's crystalline matrix and immediately exploited a weakness nobody had considered. Vethrik bodies were designed for light refraction, which meant lots of surface area and porous structures. The capsaicin compound, designed to trigger pain receptors in mammals, found all sorts of interesting crystalline structures to interact with. Shard's carefully controlled light refraction became chaotic disco ball, his entire body broadcasting his position while his pain receptors, and yes, crystalline life forms had those, lit up like a supernova. Contact! Unison's 3 bodies moved in concert, producing neural whips that crackled with energy. Kira was already inside their reach, because humans had learned to fight things bigger and stronger than themselves by getting too close for those advantages to matter. Her elbow took 1 Carthax body and what might have been its throat, dropping it immediately. The collective consciousness screamed through all 3 bodies, and in that moment of disorientation, Kira's boot found the knee joint of body number 2. The thing about hive minds is that they're excellent at multitasking right up until you introduce enough pain to overwhelm their processing. Kira introduced that pain enthusiastically. Depth and pressure came from behind, tentacles extending with paralytic-coated tips that could drop a Torvan in seconds. Would have been a perfect strike if humans weren't evolved to track motion through peripheral vision that could spot predators while appearing to look elsewhere entirely. Kira twisted, grabbed 1 tentacle, and did something that shouldn't have been possible for her size and species. She yanked the Quellan clean out of his environmental suit. The thing about Quellan is that they need water pressure to maintain their form. Remove that, and physics becomes very unkind. Depth made a sound like a dying balloon as his body lost cohesion, tentacles flailing uselessly. Pressure, showing more sense than her twin, released a toxin cloud from her suit's emergency reserves. Brilliant tactic, except humans had been dealing with chemical warfare since someone figured out you could burn the right herbs to make enemies uncomfortable. Kira held her breath. Deathworld lungs were absurdly efficient, and grabbed Pressure's suit. Here's something the galaxy consistently underestimated. Human grip strength. Evolved from tree-climbing primates, refined through tool use, backed by adrenaline that could temporarily double muscle performance. Kira's hands found purchase on the suit's shell and squeezed. The suit, designed for a water pressure but not for focused kinetic force from an angry ape descendant, cracked, then crumpled, then failed catastrophically, spraying water and one very startled Quellen across the hallway. 10 seconds had elapsed. 3 assassins were down. The hallway was rapidly turning into an environmental hazard zone. Vex finally moved because Torvin didn't rush. They advanced like geological events. His massive silicon arm swung in an arc that would have turned Kira into paste if it connected. Would have been a guaranteed kill, except Kira had already processed his movement pattern, calculated his reach, and used the split second of his wind-up to do what humans did best. Exploit physics like they'd written the manual. She ran directly at him. Vex's combat programming didn't account for prey that charged. His swing adjusted, trying to track her movement, but Kira slid under his arm like she was stealing home plate, her own momentum carrying her between his legs while her hands grabbed the utility belt she'd spotted. Every Institute student carried emergency equipment. Vex, being a careful professional, carried backups. Kira found his gravity anchor, a device designed to secure Torvin in low-gravity environments, and activated it while still sliding. The anchor engaged, generating a localized gravitational field that pinned Vex to the floor with roughly 15 times his already considerable mass. The floor, not designed for this, cracked. Vex roared, trying to move, succeeding only in creating interesting spiderweb patterns in the deck plating. 15 seconds. 4 down. Shard was recovering from his light refraction chaos, and he was done playing careful. Crystalline blades extended from his arms, vibrating at frequencies that could slice through hull plating. He lunged at Kira with the kind of speed that made Vethric legendary assassins, fast enough that most species couldn't track the movement. Kira tracked it. Her backpack came off her shoulder and met his blade mid-swing. The vibration blade cut through the backpack, through her datapad, through 3 textbooks, and stopped at the one thing she'd been carrying that wasn't standard educational material. A metal water bottle. Earth steel. Gravity forged, hardened through processes that Garden World metallurgy hadn't needed to develop. The blade vibrated against it, screeching, then shattered as its frequency met immovable resistance. Shard had exactly enough time to process this impossibility before Kira's forehead met his crystalline face with the force of a Deathworld primate that had evolved to bash things with their skulls. Vethric weren't designed for impact trauma. Their crystalline matrices were elegant, efficient, and phenomenally bad at distributing kinetic force. Shard's face spiderwebbed, then fragmented, then ceased being a face in any meaningful sense. He collapsed, light dimming, neural functions scrambling for cohesion they'd never find. 20 seconds. 5 trained assassins. One hallway that now looked like a tornado had fought a hurricane while a chemical plant watched. Kira stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, not from exhaustion, but from adrenaline that would keep burning for another few minutes until her endocrine system decided the threat had passed. Her knuckles were bleeding. Her forehead would bruise spectacularly. Her backpack was ruined. She was alive. Around her, the hallway had frozen. Students from a dozen species pressed against walls or hovering in doorways, their various sensory organs processing the same impossible sight. 5 professional killers arranged in artistic poses of defeat, and 1 human girl who looked more annoyed than anything. Seriously? Kira said, her voice carrying that particular tone of exhausted irritation that transcended language barriers. I have a test in quantum mechanics in 20 minutes. A Vethric student made a sound like wind chimes, having an anxiety attack. 2 Quellan fainted in their suits, which created interesting problems for whoever had to carry them. The Carthax student nearest to Unison's bodies carefully backed away, while trying very hard not to look like prey retreating. Campus security arrived 4 minutes later, which was actually impressive response time given they'd had to process sensor data that made no tactical sense. The lead officer, a Torvin named Boulder Who Watches, obviously, stood at the hallway entrance for a solid 10 seconds before his translator managed to produce words. What? How? The report said 5 hostiles. 5 hostiles, Kira confirmed, pointing at each in turn. Shard something with neural disruptor, Carthax hive mind with whips, 2 Quellan with toxins, and 1 very solid Torvin with gravity issues now. She paused. They were waiting to kill me. I declined. Boulder Who Watches looked at the scene. Again. Shard's crystalline body was still refacting light in concerning ways. Unison's 3 bodies were making sounds that suggested their collective consciousness was having trouble reaching consensus on continued existence. Both Quellan were experiencing what biologists call catastrophic environmental failure. Vex was pinned under gravitational force that would take specialized equipment to remove. You declined. Enthusiastically, Kira said. She was checking her fingernails now, adrenaline fading, leaving behind the kind of exhaustion that came from burning through 3 days' worth of energy in 20 seconds. Look, I get it. Humans are scary, Deathworld nightmares. We're all very terrifying. But could someone please note for the record that I didn't start this? They were literally waiting to murder me. A medical team arrived, saw the scene, and immediately began arguing about triage priorities in 5 different languages simultaneously. The Quellan medics were insisting their species needed water urgently. The Vethric team was concerned about crystalline matrix repair. The Carthax specialists were having philosophical debates about treating a distributed consciousness. Nobody was particularly concerned about Kira, because aside from some bleeding knuckles and an impending bruise, she was fine. Deathworld fine, which meant she'd probably go for a run later to burn off residual stress. Boulder Who Watches pulled up his incident report template and stared at it like it had personally offended him. The form had categories for various types of violence, but nothing quite captured student disassembled 5 professional assassins with improvised weapons and attitude. I need your statement, he said eventually. Sure, they attacked. I defended myself. Biology happened. Kira shrugged. Pretty standard Tuesday. This is Thursday. Is it? Sorry, midterms have me confused. The security chief looked at her, then at the carnage, then back at her. You do understand that these were Kesvar Guild assassins? Top tier? The kind that governments hire for extremely expensive problems? Cool, Kira said. Can I go? Seriously, quantum mechanics test. Professor Seven doesn't accept survived assassination attempt as an excuse for tardiness. Boulder Who Watches realized he was dealing with a human, which meant standard protocols were more suggestions than rules. No, you absolutely cannot go. There's going to be an investigation. We need witness statements, medical evaluation, incident documentation. This is a major security breach. Right, because I'm the security breach. Kira sat down against the wall, pulling out her datapad. No, wait, that was destroyed. She sighed. Fine. but someone's buying me a new data pad and reimbursing my textbooks. Do you know how expensive advanced xenobiology texts are? Over the next 3 hours, the Institute descended into the kind of administrative chaos that made interstellar war look organized. Witness statements contradicted each other because different species perceived time and space differently. The medical team couldn't agree on how to treat the assassins because their injuries were each uniquely catastrophic. Security had to seal off the entire corridor while specialists analyzed the crime scene. Meanwhile, the galactic news networks were having a field day. Someone had leaked footage from the hallway sensors, and within an hour, Deathworld Girl Destroys Assassins was trending across 47 systems. The Institute's public relations department was fielding calls from everyone from news agencies to military recruiters to a Vethric crystal sculptor who wanted to do a commemorative piece. The human embassy called expressing concern, which was diplomatic speak for, "We told you this might happen, but nobody listened." The Kesavar Guild issued a statement declining further contracts involving human targets and offering refunds to existing clients. 3 separate mercenary companies quietly updated their threat assessment protocols to flag humans as extreme risk, avoid engagement. In the Institute Director's office, Administrator Kelvon, a dignified Quellan whose water suit was currently displaying stress patterns, reviewed the incident reports with the kind of resignation that came from knowing this would become a case study in security textbooks. 5 assassins, he said quietly. Professional killers with decades of experience. Defeated by one second-year student in 20 seconds. His security chief, present via hologram because he was still managing the crime scene, made a gesture that translated roughly to, "I tried to warn everyone, but nobody listens to security." "The problem," Kelvon continued, "is that she's not even our most combat-capable human student. The 2 engineers have been running combat simulations against station security for fun. They have a 97% win rate. 98% as of yesterday," security corrected glumly. "They figured out how to hack the gravity plating." Kelvon's suit bubbled with what might have been laughter or tears. The Deathworld Integration Initiative was supposed to prove humans could be civilized. Instead, we've demonstrated that civilization is a very thin veneer over evolutionary optimization for violence. To be fair, security said, she didn't want to fight. She wanted to take her test. They initiated hostilities. Yes, and they learned an important lesson about assuming you're the apex predator. Kelvon pulled up Kira's file. Exemplary grades, no prior incidents, several commendations from professors for collaborative work. She tutored Vethric students in mathematics and helped Quellan classmates with physical tasks their tentacles couldn't manage. By every metric, she was a model student. She'd also just turned a hallway into an impromptu anatomy lesson using nothing but reflexes and aggression. "What do we do?" security asked. "What can we do?" Kelvon responded. She defended herself. Legally, ethically, she did nothing wrong. The assassins are the criminals here. The other students are terrified. Then they've learned something valuable about Deathworlders. Kelvon switched off his display. Schedule a mandatory assembly on human biology and psychology. Make it clear what humans are capable of and why antagonizing them is inadvisable. And update our security protocols to reflect the reality that our most dangerous elements are also our most fragile-looking students. Should we expel her? For what? Successfully defending her life? Kelvon made the Quellan equivalent of a headshake. No, but I am going to have a conversation with all 3 human students about proportionality. That conversation happened the next day, after Kira had finally taken her quantum mechanics test, aced it, naturally, and the Institute had managed to clean the hallway. The three humans sat in Kelvan's office, looking appropriately serious, while the administrator tried to figure out how to discuss violence with species evolved for it. "I understand you were defending yourself," he began carefully. "Yes, sir," Kira replied. "And I'm not criticizing your actions." "Okay. But there's been concern about human capabilities." The other two humans exchanged glances. Marcus Chen, the taller engineer, spoke up. "Sir, with respect, what were we supposed to do? If someone tries to kill Kira, should she just let them?" "No, of course not, but perhaps what?" Zara Okoye, the other engineer, leaned forward. "Use less violence? They were professional assassins. This wasn't a misunderstanding at a bar. They came to kill her." Kelvan's suit bubbled uncomfortably. "I'm simply asking if there was a way to resolve this with less devastation." "Sure," Kira said. "They could have not tried to murder me. That would have resulted in significantly less devastation for everyone." This, Kelvan realized, was the fundamental problem with Deathworlders. They weren't wrong. By any logical standard, Kira had responded appropriately to an assassination attempt. The issue was that appropriate response for human-involved capabilities that most species never needed to develop. "Fine," he said finally. "But please understand that the galaxy isn't used to students who can dismantle professional killers. It's unsettling. We can't change what we are," Marcus said quietly. "Our planet made us this way. You invited us here. You don't get to be surprised when we turn out to be exactly what our environment designed." And that really was the heart of it. The galaxy had spent so long being the apex of civilization that they'd forgotten what it took to climb from the bottom. Humans hadn't forgotten because they'd never stopped climbing. Every genetic trait, every instinct, every reflex was honed by a planet that gave no quarter and expected none. The assembly happened the next week. Attendance was mandatory, which meant every student in the Institute packed into the main auditorium to hear Professor Kulvin, xenobiology expert and notably Kira's regular teacher, explain humans to an audience that had just watched one disassemble 5 professionals. "Humans," he began, his tentacles gesturing at the holographic display behind him, "are the result of approximately 4 billion years of evolutionary pressure on a Class 12 death world. For context, most of your homeworlds rate between Class 1 and Class 3. The display showed Earth rotating, looking deceptively beautiful from orbit. Then it zoomed in to show hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, megafauna with teeth the size of a forearm, microscopic organisms that could liquefy organs, and weather patterns that could flash freeze or superheat with minimal warning. Everything on Earth," Kulvin continued, "is optimized for survival in an environment of constant threat. Humans are persistence predators with prey animal anxiety. They can track targets for days without rest. They can heal from injuries that would kill most species. Their adrenaline response can temporarily increase strength by over 100%. They can consume mild toxins for recreation and develop immunity to poisons that would kill Torven." A Vethric student raised a crystalline appendage. "But they're so small." "Yes," Kulvin agreed. "Compared to Torven or Carthax, humans are relatively small. This is because they evolved to be efficient, not large. Every calorie is optimized. Their brains alone consume 20% of their energy because intelligence on Earth was the difference between eating and being eaten." He pulled up footage from the hallway incident, carefully edited to remove the most graphic elements. When Kira Vex faced 5 assassins, her conscious mind had minimal input. Her brainstem recognized threat, flooded her system with adrenaline, and activated reflexes trained by millions of years of successful predation. She didn't think about fighting. Her body simply did what Deathworld bodies do. "Is she okay?" a Quellen student asked nervously. "She's fine, some bruising." She requested extra time in the gym that evening to burn off residual stress hormones. This is normal for humans after violent encounters. Quellen switched displays. What you witnessed wasn't unusual human capability. It was average. The 2 human engineers in our attendance could likely perform similar feats. Many human children could. The auditorium filled with that particular silence that comes from collective existential crisis. Somewhere in the back, a student made a sound like a corrupted file. "The point," Quellen said gently, "is not to fear humans. The point is to understand them. Yes, they're capable of devastating violence. They're also capable of remarkable compassion, creativity, and cooperation. These traits aren't contradictory. They're complementary. Humans bonded as tribes to survive, predators. They developed empathy to maintain social cohesion. They created art to process trauma. They're not monsters. They're survivors." He paused, letting that sink in. Kira Vex tutors struggling students every Tuesday. She volunteers at the Interspecies Cultural Center. She's written 3 papers advancing our understanding of cross-species biology. She's also capable of defending herself with extreme prejudice when necessary. Both things are true. Both things are human. The assembly ended with students looking thoughtful rather than terrified, which was probably the best outcome possible. Over the following weeks, the Institute gradually returned to normal, though normal now included significantly upgraded security protocols and a mandatory course on Deathworld biology. The assassins, meanwhile, recovered slowly. Shard would need extensive crystal matrix reconstruction. Unison's collective consciousness was having trouble reaching consensus on much of anything. The Quellen twins were in therapy, separately, because they couldn't stand to be near each other anymore. Vex had a healthy fear of gravity now. None of them accepted contracts involving humans ever again. The Kesvar Guild updated their database to flag human targets with the highest possible risk rating, adding a note: Deathworld species. Recommend avoidance. If contract is unavoidable, recommend planetary bombardment from orbit. As for the client who'd hired them, that remained officially mysterious, though rumors pointed toward a Vethric noble family whose daughter competed with Kira for top grades in xenobiology. The family denied everything, paid a substantial settlement to the Institute, and quietly withdrew their daughter to a different school in a different sector, far away from any humans. Kira, for her part, went back to being a student. She attended lectures, completed assignments, helped classmates, and generally acted like someone who hadn't hospitalized 5 professional killers. The other students gave her slightly more space in hallways now, but also sought her help more often, because if you're going to ask someone to explain quantum entanglement, might as well ask the apex predator who aced the test. 3 months later, during end-of-term celebrations, Kira found herself at a cross-species social event that the Institute optimistically called a mixer, and most students called structured chaos with refreshments. She was attempting to explain human music to a confused Vethric when Marcus and Zara joined her. "Heard from admissions," Marcus said, offering her a beverage that was technically safe for human consumption. "Next year's human cohort is 20 students." 20? Kira raised her eyebrows. "That's huge. Apparently our presence here has been deemed a successful integration despite, the assassination thing." "Because of the assassination thing," Zara corrected. Nothing says safe environment like students who can defend themselves from professional killers. They laughed, that peculiar human laugh that other species found unsettling. The sound of primates acknowledging absurdity while their hindbrains cataloged exits and threat vectors because evolution didn't take breaks. Across the room, Administrator Kelvon watched them with something between pride and resignation. The Deathworld Integration Initiative had succeeded, just not in the way anyone planned. Humans couldn't be civilized in the traditional sense because they were already civilized, just in ways that acknowledged their nature rather than denying it. The galaxy would adapt. It always did. Species that had never needed to fight would learn from those that fought to exist. Garden worlds would understand death worlds. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone decided to hire assassins to kill a human, they'd remember what happened in a hallway at the Intersystem Scholastic Institute, when 5 professionals learned that humans were called Deathworlders for a reason. Kira Vex finished her beverage, made a face because alien drinks always tasted like liquid disappointment, and headed back to her dorm. She had studying to do, friends to message, and a life to live. The fact that she could also disassemble trained killers with improvised weapons was just another item on her resume, filed somewhere between fluent in 3 languages and can do differential equations drunk. That's the thing about Deathworlders. They don't see themselves as exceptional. To them, surviving is just what you do. It's everyone else who makes a big deal out of it. The galaxy was learning that lesson slowly, one surprised species at a time. And somewhere in the administrative offices, threat assessments were being rewritten, security protocols updated, and a new understanding was emerging. Humans weren't the monsters you had to fear. They were the monsters you wanted on your side. Which was probably the smartest conclusion anyone had reached all year. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.